You provide the emulator in games, I give you the configuration files, you put them in the right place, and hey presto, everything works. At least that's the idea. And the Supermodel pre-configuration for Sega Model 3 is probably my most popular, just because it's such a nightmare to get set up. And that's the point of these projects, is to take away the headache, so all you've got to do is put some files in some folders to make everything work. Now I did have a really long intro recorded explaining everything under the sun, but really what is the point? All you really need to know is that every single game has had their controls pre-mapped and are provided a button layout image for every single game. All of the light gun games are completely accurate and you can play these with a controller, mouse or a light gun. And all of the racing games have had their analog saturation changed so they're no longer twitchy with their steering, and this took ages. You may have noticed this is now my 5th video that I've made for Supermodel, and you're probably wondering why so many setup guides. That's because each time I make a tutorial with a pre-configuration, I then find a bunch of enhancements, fixes and little things that you can do that make a major difference. It's one of those emulators where there's always one more thing to do or one more thing to discover. But now with this tutorial and pre-configuration, I'm pretty convinced we've managed to nail absolutely everything down. I really want this to be the final de facto setup guide for Supermodel, so it better be perfect. And because of that, this guide is going to be pretty comprehensive. So I'm going to show you how to use Supermodel with and without the UI, because it's so hard to get hold of and it's highly requested. We got a brand new feature which is Supersample anti-aliasing, so I'm going to show you how to use that. I'm also going to show you how to import all of these games into LaunchBox using my custom platform XML. And towards the end of the video, I'm going to be covering all of the common issues along with their fixes. So we've got a little bit to cover here, so let's get straight into it. Now you want to grab the Supermodel emulator from the official Supermodel website. Just click on the download section here, and the top one should be the most recent version, and that's the one that I recommend that you grab. When it comes to the Sega Model 3 UI, unfortunately all the places I used to get it from, the links are now completely dead. But if you want to try your luck and find it, you need version 860 or newer. But it is not needed for this tutorial at all. And for me personally, I haven't actually used the UI in a long time. Any adjustments that I make, I do directly in the ini file, and I use LaunchBox to actually launch the games. When it comes to ROMs, non-merged is definitely the way forward. Split ROMs do work, but they will be missing certain optional files, and merged ROMs, Supermodel absolutely hates. So you want to be using non-merged all the way. And ideally, you want these from set 0.253 or newer, but you can go as old as 0.236. Once you've got that sorted out, you want to come to this LaunchBox forum page here. I'll put the link in the description below. And we're going to grab the configuration files to make all of this work seamlessly. So once you hit this page, you want to click download this file on the right hand side. And you can see we've got a few things we can download. Some of these are mandatory and some of these are optional. Now the first thing you absolutely need is either the dinput.ini file or the xinput.ini file. You're not downloading both. You're just downloading the one that matches your controller input type. So if for example you're using an Xbox controller, you'd need the xinput.ini file, and if for example you're using a PS4 controller, you'd need the dinput.ini. If you're unsure of your controller type, just give it a quick Google and it should tell you. The second file you absolutely need is the NVRAM zip here, so make sure you grab that. And also if you're using LaunchBox, the Sega Model 3 platform XML. Now the other 3 downloads is just artwork, but the button layout images reflect exactly what I've set for all of these games. So you can use these for reference so you know exactly what the buttons are for every single game. If you don't have a LaunchBox account, don't want one, or you're waiting for it to be authorized, don't fret. All of the mandatory files are available on GitHub so you can still get everything set up. But if you do want the images, they are only available on LaunchBox. And again, I'll put the link for this in the description below. Now that we've got everything we need, all we need to do is just put all these files in the correct places. Now with the Supermodel emulator, obviously you want to unzip that, and I've already done that here. Then just to open up that folder, then you want to open up either your xinput.ini or your dinput.ini. I've got xinput here. And with the Supermodel ini contained, you want to bring that over to the config folder of Supermodel and replace the one that's already there. Then just close this down, open up the NVRAM zip that you've downloaded, Select all of the files within with Ctrl A and bring those over to the NVRAM folder of Supermodel. Now, if you're not using the Sega Model 3 UI, they're the only files that you need to put into Supermodel. But if you did find the UI and you want to use it, you just need to unzip it. I've already done that here. Open it up, and then you want to transfer across the include folder, the snaps folder, and the Sega Model 3 UI exe. Transfer those across into the Supermodel file system, and make sure you don't transfer any of these because these are meant for older versions of Supermodel. Then we can just close that down. Now, with your ROMs location, you definitely want to be using the ROMs folder contained within the emulator itself. I do generally like to use my games in the games folder within LaunchBox, but with Supermodel, it's far easier, simpler, and it mitigates a bunch of issues just to use this ROMs folder here. As soon as those files are in the correct places and the ROMs in that ROMs folder, that's pretty much it for emulator setup. But before I show you how to change settings with and without the UI, we're going to get everything imported into LaunchBox so everybody can launch and play the games whilst they're changing their settings. So because we're using a custom platform XML to import these games where all of that stuff's been handled for you, it is easier, but the import process does look very different to the normal way. So obviously you need LaunchBox and you want to make sure that it's not running. You want to close it down and make sure that it's not running in the background. Then you want to go into the file system, go into the data folder, then go into the platforms folder. Then you want to open up the custom platform XML that you downloaded earlier on, take the Sega Model 3 XML and place it in this folder here. So now when we start LaunchBox, it's going to catch that XML and include Sega Model 3 in your platforms. So now you can go ahead and actually start LaunchBox. Once you've got LaunchBox started up, you should be able to see the Sega Model 3 platform on the left hand side. It should be in the arcade subsection. And if you don't have this view layout, just know that it is a platform and it should appear somewhere on the left hand side. Now the first thing that we need to do is tell LaunchBox where our ROMs are located because it still doesn't know that. So obviously you want to make sure that Sega Model 3 is selected and then just click on any Sega Model 3 game. Now we need to select all of these games by pressing Ctrl A on our keyboards, then go up to Tools, go down to File Management, and then click on Change ROMs Folder Path for selected games. Then you want to find where your emulator is located, then click on the ROMs folder where your ROMs are located, and then press Select Folder. You want to press Yes to this, and if you get this message, don't worry about it, we're just going to press Yes, it doesn't matter for the moment. And once that's done, you've got all of your ROMs locations sorted out with LaunchBox. With that out of the way, we can now add the emulator. So you want to go to Tools in the top left hand corner, go to Manage, and then click on Emulators. Then click on this Add button in the bottom left hand corner, and with the emulator name, of course we want that to be Supermodel. And what the import wizard is going to do is going to add the full screen command line parameter for us. Now for me personally, I don't actually like having this here because I set it in the ini file or the UI. And if I change it there, full screen will still be applied if I launch it through LaunchBox, and it will just confuse me. So I'm going to delete it out of here, but that's just down to personal preference. Then you want to set your application path, click on Browse here, and then you want to select the Supermodel exe, which will be located in the emulator folder, then just press Open. Then you want to go to Associated Platforms, and you want to make sure that Sega Model 3 is in the top left hand corner, and Default Emulator is checked here. Once you've done that, you just press OK, and if you get this message, you press Yes, and then just press Close, and that's it. So let's start up again to make sure everything is working. There we go, nice and easy. I'm just going to give a quick tour of the XML with all of the artwork added for peace of mind so you know exactly what's been done. And as you can see, all of the games have already been imported for you, but most importantly, only the versions that you want to be using. A good example of this is Sega Bass Fishing. There's a bunch of different versions, but you only want to use the upright one because it's the most controller friendly, and that was the one that was ported over to the Dreamcast. So you definitely only want to use this version, and it's the only one that's been added to the XML. So you can't miss. You're not going to be launching a version that is broken or that you can't play. This is effectively one game, one ROM, however some games have different versions with different content, and of course I've made sure to add those. So Scud Race and Scud Race Plus are both here because they have different tracks and slightly different content. Sega Rally 2 and the deluxe version are here because the deluxe version has different liveries. Spike Out and Spike Out Final Edition have completely different levels, so again they're both here. And Virtua Fighter 3 and Team Battle are both here for obvious reasons. Now there are a million different versions of Virtua Striker 2, and I've only added the 3 parent versions for the 3 main revisions, just to keep it nice and simple. Now you may have noticed the controller layout images are appearing in the details panel on the right hand side, and to get them to appear here is a little bit counterintuitive. Basically you need to go into the images folder for Sega Model 3 and add those button layout images to one of these screenshot folders here. Doesn't matter which folder that you use as long as it's a screenshot folder. And that might seem counterintuitive, but it's only the screenshots that appear in the details panel on the right hand side. I personally use the gameplay folder just because. So now when you select a game, you should see the button layout image on the right hand side. You just click on it and you know exactly what the buttons are before you even play the game, which is super handy. Also, in the description for every single game will be my technical documentation for that game specifically. So if you want to backtrack anything that I've done, you can do so here. Also, as a bonus, if a game has a cheat, I've also added that to the description. And yes, Sega Rally 2 here has had the Delta and Sleeker cars already unlocked for you. So all you got to do is press view change and handbrake on the car selection screen to get at those. Now at this point, you are pretty much good to play some games, as long as you don't need to change any settings and you're not having any issues. But now I am going to be covering how to change your settings with and without the UI. I'm also going to show you how to implement anti-aliasing, how to get extra performance, and covering all of the common issues along with their fixes. Now the vast majority of these settings have been set as they are for a reason, and there's really only a handful of options that you can freely adjust without having an adverse effect on the entire build. And of course I'm going to show you what those are. So if you manage to get hold of the UI, you want to start that up. Let's get that out of the way. And if you're not using the UI, you want to go into the config folder of Supermodel and you want to open up the Supermodel INI. So let's just get these two side by side. Now the first setting that is freely adjustable is of course resolution, and in the UI you've got a drop down list here and you can set a custom resolution with this little button here. And if you want to do that in the INI file, if you don't have the UI, scroll all the way down to the bottom and it's going to be about there. There it is. So there it is in the UI and there it is in the INI file. And obviously with the INI file, change these values to whatever you need them to be and make sure that you save it. The second setting that you can freely adjust is more of an enhancement, and that's anamorphic widescreen. When widescreen and wide background are both active, Supermodel is effectively hacking into true anamorphic widescreen. And for me personally, this is my favourite feature of the entire emulator. If you're familiar with the channel, you know I love features like this and I fully recommend you at least try it. So as you can see, it's right there within the UI, and if you want to change that in the INI file instead, go pretty much all the way up to the top, just underneath where all of these per game settings are, and it should be under graphics. Then you need to change the widescreen from a 0 to a 1 and wide background as well from a 0 to a 1. Make sure you save it. The third option you can freely adjust is Crosshairs. Now in the UI you'll need to go over to the control tab here and you can see it's in the bottom right hand corner and it's pretty self-explanatory, so set this to however you want it to be. And if you want to change that in the INI file, you scroll down towards the bottom and you can see we've got Crosshairs right there. Whilst we're on the subject of settings, I'm going to show you how to add Supersample anti-aliasing. And as of recording this video, it's a brand new feature to Supermodel. However, it does come with a bit of a disclaimer. Because we're using supersampling, we're effectively brute forcing anti-aliasing. And as a result, it's very costly on your GPU. So depending on your hardware, you may need to use it on its lowest setting, and if you have a potato for a GPU like me, you can't use it at all. I would love to give you a before and after with supersampling, but unfortunately I just can't do that. But I'm still going to show you how to add it directly to the INI file. Now one thing that needs to be noted is that you can't turn supersampling on with the UI, and that's the main reason I don't actually use the UI, is because it doesn't have all of the settings that I want to play around with. So irrespective whether you have it or not, you need to add it to the ini file. And the easiest way to do that is just to scroll all the way down to the bottom and just to add it above the Sega Model 3 UI line, and then just type out Supersampling. Then you want an equal sign, and then you want to stop there. So the maximum setting is 8 with the minimum setting being 1. I recommend that you start about 2 or 3, see how it performs, and then increase it or decrease it accordingly. So set that to 2 or 3, however you want it to be, and then don't forget to save it. Now, one very important thing to note is that there is no offsetting with Supersampling. So if you set this to 0, it just won't display absolutely anything on screen. You'll still have audio, but no video. So if you don't want to use it, like me, delete it out of the ini file entirely, and then obviously save it. When it comes to squeezing extra performance, if you're getting slowdown, unfortunately there's not that many options. Obviously using widescreen and wide background is quite resource hungry, so you can turn both of those off. And apart from that, the only other thing you can really do is dial back your resolution to where it's at an acceptable frame rate. Do keep in mind that for widescreen and wide background to work, a widescreen resolution needs to be set. Now we can move on to hopefully fixing any issues that you might come across. And we're going to start with the most commonly reported issue, which is Supermodel running too fast despite VSync being set. And this should only happen if you're running a display that is faster than 60 Hz. And what's happening here is basically VSync is being ignored. Now some users have reported that using throttle in the bottom right hand corner here does help that issue. And if you want to change that in the ini file, if you scroll down towards the bottom, you can see that it's right there. Just make sure you change the 0 to a 1 and you save it. Now if that doesn't work, then you are going to need to put in a little bit of effort. Basically, you need to restrict Supermodel to run at 60 FPS using your graphics card settings. And how you do this does depend on the brand of graphics card you own. I've got an NVIDIA graphics card, so I can only show you how to do it with the NVIDIA control panel. But I do assume that AMD and the rest all have a similar procedure. So if you do have an NVIDIA graphics card, obviously you need to start the NVIDIA control panel up, and then you want to select Manage 3D Settings on the left hand side. Then the first thing you want to do is to check to see if Supermodel is in this drop down list here. So open it up and see if it's in there, but the likelihood that it is quite slim. So if it's not there, you need to add it with this add button here. So click on that, wait for it to load up. Now one important thing that needs to be noted here is that all of your Supermodel EXEs are going to appear in this list. So if you've got multiple, they're all going to appear. So we can see I've got one there, and if we scroll down, we've got another one here. But if you hover your mouse over it, it will tell you where the location of it is. So you know exactly which one that you're setting this for. So this is the one I know that I want to be setting this for, so I'm going to select it and then add select program. There we go. So now that it's all loaded up in here and it's selected as the program to customize, we're going to scroll down to max frame rate. Then just click here, click on, and then rather than using the slider, just go to the FPS on the right hand side, type in 60, press OK, and then apply. And there we go, that should fix Supermodel running fast if you're using a monitor that's faster than 60 Hz. Another issue you might come across, especially if you're a TV user, is Supermodel looking zoomed in. And this happens if you have anything other than 100% set in your scan layout in your window settings. So if you've got 125 or above set, it's probably going to look zoomed in. And the fix for this doesn't require you to set 100%. We can do it just for the Supermodel emulator, so you can keep your current setting. And to do this, you just want to right click on the Supermodel EXE, go to Properties, let's bring this up here. You want to go to Compatibility, change settings for all users, and then change high DPI settings. Click on that, and then you want to check override high DPI scaling here and make sure that it's set to application. Then just press OK, apply, OK, OK, and then that's that done. So it should only apply for the Supermodel EXE. If you're a light gun user, this entire next section of advice is dedicated to you. And the first thing I want to mention here is the fact that all of these light gun games are actually light gun ready. So they're all in raw input, ready for 2 players. You'll still need to get everything set up in your light gun software, but in terms of getting everything set up to that point, it's all been done for you. So all of these games are accurate, in raw input, ready for 2 players, with shoot and reload being on the mouse, and start and credits being on the keyboard. And I'm going to put these inputs on screen now so you can line them up in your light gun software. One thing you're definitely going to need to do if you're using a light gun is change your mouse indexing. By default, I've got this set up to be in positions 1 and 2 for players 1 and 2 respectively, and this is just fine for mice. However, if you're using a light gun, these generally show up in positions 5, 6 and 7, so you will need to change it. And I do have an entire dedicated video on how to find out what your mouse index is and how to change it directly in the INI file. And I'll put a link for that video in the description below. And if you are using a light gun, I'm going to assume you already know about mouse indexing and raw input and the nightmares it can bring. Now before I close out the video, I do just want to clear up a couple of things that I'm always asked about, just so everybody is on the same page. And the first thing I'm going to mention here is the racing games. These definitely benefited from having their analog saturation changed, and they're no longer twitchy with their outward steering. But because these are arcade games with fixed 1-to-1 analog steering, the in-game steering tracks exactly to where you have your analog stick, which is totally not how console racing games work. So without getting overly technical with all of this, the long and short is you've got to use the stick like you're using a steering wheel and steer like you're driving a real car. This is just a limitation of the original hardware, and there's nothing really that can be done about this. So because the in-game steering is tracking your analog stick 1-to-1, if you're steering left and the left stick is all the way to the left and you suddenly release it, the center return is going to happen at the speed of the stick moving, which, as I mentioned earlier, is not how console racing games work. Their center return is pretty much at a set value by the developer. So these racing games do play slightly different to a console racing game, but just remember you've got to ease the left stick back to center and use it like it's a steering wheel. All Sega Model 3 racing games do this except for Sega Rally 2. This game has a center return system that's pretty much the same as a console racing game, and as a result it's definitely the best one to play. If you're looking to play the racing games in multiplayer with multiple instances and or screens, unfortunately this isn't necessarily the build for you. You can use it as a starting point, but you are going to need to do a bunch of stuff to get multiplayer set up. And doing this has been heavily covered by a guy called Mr. Thunderwing, who in my opinion is the foremost expert on Supermodel multiplayer. So I'm going to pop a link in the description below for his most recent Supermodel video. If you're struggling with the view change in Ski Champ, I don't blame you. With this one, when it says press start now, you're not actually using the start button to start your game. Instead, you're going to use one of these 3 buttons that I'm going to put on screen now, and pressing one of these will start your game in that view. Unfortunately, once you're in game, you can't then change your view. You may have noticed with Star Wars Arcade, during the Lightsaber bonus stages, it flips the Y-axis, which is quite confusing. Unfortunately, there's not really anything that can be done about that, it's just the way the game works. However, what I like to do is for all the shooting sections, I'll use a mouse or a light gun, and for the lightsaber battles, I'll use a controller. And that's because I've mapped the controller specifically for the lightsaber battles. So just remember to have your controller plugged in at the same time, and this is all possible because Supermodel facilitates being able to have multiple inputs mapped from different controllers. Another question I get asked a lot is, does this work with Steam Deck, RetroBat, Batocera, etc, etc? And the answer is yes, it should work with whatever you want. Just remember, the most important part of the whole procedure is selecting the correct INI file for your controller type and the NVRAM files. As long as you got both of those right, you're cooking. There we go, that's the result of spending about 1.5 years with this emulator, tinkering around and getting everything pre-configured. And I really think I've maxed out what I can provide for this emulator. I've given everyone an XML with everything pre-imported, all of the artwork, gameplay videos, and I've pre-configured the living daylights out of it. I think it's now as perfect as I can get it. If you're interested and you want to know exactly what I've set for this configuration and you want to check out all of my findings, I've put all of my documentation up on that same LaunchBox page. Again, the link for this will be in the description below. Anyway, hopefully you've managed to get Supermodel set up into LaunchBox without the use of the UI. And if I've made that happen for you, give me a thumbs up. And if you think I've saved you some time, slam me a subscribe. And apart from that, go play some games. Adios.